In this section, we'll focus on the first couple of years of Nixon's term in office. And certainly early in his term, Nixon proposed to move power from the federal government to the state and local governments, which is, of course, something that a Republican would probably want to do. And he called this his new federalism. He said the federal government was bloated and inefficient. When you look at his policies, however, actually Nixon cared most about foreign policy. And when it came to domestic policy, he really was just flying by what he thought was pragmatic politically. He remained a moderate for much of his administration, certainly the early part. In a general sense, Nixon became more conservative as time passed and as he entered his second term. For example, Nixon appointed a relatively moderate cabinet of officials that were businessmen and close associates of his own. Nixon took every opportunity he could to appear like he was in touch with mainstream America. And anyway, he met with Elvis at the White House. You can see in this picture. In any event, this is the most popular picture requested from the National Archives. And today, it's a very famous picture of an odd couple, Nixon and Elvis. Because again, Nixon was trying to be pragmatic and popular. He didn't really have any ideological stance domestically overall. He tended to lean a little more moderate early, and he signed legislation expanding Social Security benefits and making automatic cost of living adjustments to match inflation. And he also signed legislation expanding subsidized housing. And all of these things, of course, you wouldn't really expect of a conservative Republican. Notably, Nixon issued the Philadelphia Order, which revolved around ensuring fair racial hiring in construction contracts in Philly. The order established racial goals and timetables for hiring in government contracting, and in doing so, it came to define the government's definition of affirmative action. That is the idea that people who were African Americans were historically disadvantaged, and the government should promote them when all other factors are equal. It involved goals and timetables, but notably not quotas. You can see Nixon's moderation in supporting the 26th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to 18-year-olds, not just 21. The movement for the 18-year-old vote had grown because of the Vietnam War. People were saying, I'm old enough to die for my country, but I'm not old enough to pick its leaders. But the young vote tended to vote Democratic, and Nixon hoped that by supporting this constitutional amendment, it would make him more popular with younger voters. Nixon most notably worked with the Democrat Daniel Patrick Moynihan and with the support of his Urban Affairs Council to propose sort of a massive revision of the nation's welfare system. And it involved replacing aid to families with dependent children and Medicaid and food stamps with what Nixon called his Family Assistance Plan. And what the plan would do was guarantee a minimum income for all Americans. It promised everybody a minimum income, and it at the same time, would initially spend more money on them to train them for jobs. If, however, they did not get a job when the employment market was at a certain level when you would think they would be able to, then they could be cut off from all future, benefits. And the plan didn't get enacted. It alienated both liberals who didn't want the aid cut off if the needy didn't get a job, and also it alienated conservatives who didn't want to spend more money on the poor. So the plan never was enacted, but was an indication of Nixon's moderation. After almost 40 years of effort, it was during the Nixon administration when the Equal Rights Amendment, which stated that all laws, local, state, and national, could not differentiate on gender, passed Congress. And Nixon endorsed it, and then, of course, as a constitutional amendment, it was sent to the states for ratification. And there's going to be more about the effort to ratify the ERA later in the Nixon administration. You can also see somewhat of Nixon's moderation in his appointments for the Supreme Court. He actually had 4 Supreme Court justices appointed in his first term. With his first vacancy, he nominated Warren Burger, who went on to become a Chief Justice. With his second, he nominated 2 candidates whom Congress rejected, believing the candidates favored segregation. But when they were rejected, Nixon then nominated Harry Blackmun. And with his third vacancy, Nixon nominated Lewis Powell. And with his fourth and final vacancy, he nominated William Rehnquist. Rehnquist also went on to become a Chief Justice. Of the 4, really, only Rehnquist proved a arch reliable conservative. The other justices were really kind of quite moderate. One event during Nixon's early years that brought the whole nation, indeed much of the world, together was the first landing on the moon, the Apollo 11 space flight with the astronauts Neil Young, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. It landed on the lunar surface, the lunar module Eagle, on July 20th, 1969. And Neil Armstrong became the first person to step directly on the moon, uttering the famous phrase, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." They left a plaque there, and the whole they also planted a flag, shown here, and there's no wind on the moon, so there's something holding the flag up there. But when they left, the top of the module flew off, head backed up to rendezvous with the spacecraft, and the blast knocked over the flag. But the plaque they left, of course, is still there. This whole moon flight was watched worldwide, live, and it sort of fulfilled JFK's pledge to get a man to the moon and back by the end of the 1960s. And it was really, you can say, part of the Cold War race. Of course, the astronauts became heroes, and there was a ticker tape parade in New York City celebrating the crew. Nixon went to meet the astronauts while they were still quarantined, of course, with the cameras running. So it was a real highlight of the first months of the Nixon administration. In any event, this concludes the section on Nixon's early moderation.